a new equilibrium where they feel more incorporated. Like I've said, the greatest force of allies that the LGBTQ plus community has always had is heterosexual women. What you're moving towards now is doing things that is beginning to turn them from allies into people who feel that, oh, for you to thrive, I'm being deprived, and that's a problem. When they realize you're alienating allies, they will understand you've got to recalibrate to have that kind of understanding between both parties.
Hello and welcome to GB News Sunday. Thank you very much for your company this lunchtime. I'm Darren Grimes, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up this hour, new Labour MP Natalie Elphicke has been accused of lobbying ministers in an attempt to interfere in her former husband's sexual assault case. Will Starmer regret opening this can of worms? Then Susan Hall has said Wes Streeting of Labour put me in danger by claiming that a victory for Miss Hall in the London mayoral election would be a win for racists, white supremacists and Islamophobes. Should the Shadow Health Secretary apologise? And thousands of people have protested in the Swedish city of Malmö against Israel's participation in the Eurovision Song Contest, with Israel's war on Gaza casting a shadow over the final of the glitzy contest. Now, as you know by now, this show is absolutely nothing without you and your views. Let me know your thoughts on all of the stories we'll be discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say. Join the conversation there or message us on our socials. We're at GB News. First of all, though, folks, here's your news with Tatiana.
Darren, thank you. The top stories this afternoon. Claims a British-Israeli hostage has died in Gaza are being urgently investigated by the Foreign Office. Hamas says Nadav Popplewell, who was kidnapped during the October attack in Israel, was injured during an airstrike a month ago. Undated footage of the 51-year-old with a black eye was also released. The government says it's seeking more information after the terrorist group made the claim in a video. Deputy Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell is condemning the actions of Hamas.
My heart goes out to the family at this extraordinary time with the barbarism of these appalling terrorists who have treated the family in such a cynical, cruel and heartless way. And we must wait for further information to become available. But what an appalling, dreadful experience for this poor family to have to suffer at the hands of this absolutely dreadful terrorist organisation.
Tory defector Natalie Elphicke denies she lobbied the Justice Secretary over her then-husband's sex offences trial. Sir Robert Buckland claims the MP who crossed the floor to Labour requested the case to be moved to a lower-profile court. Speaking to the Sunday Times, he says she was told the request was completely inappropriate. Her spokesperson refuted the accusation, describing it as nonsense in the Mail on Sunday. Miss Elphicke ended the marriage when her husband was convicted of sexually assaulting 2 women and jailed for 2 years. At least 7 people have been killed and 17 injured after an apartment block collapsed in Russia. State media says fragments of a Ukrainian missile, which were downed by Russia's air defence system, landed on the building in the city of Belgorod. Rescue efforts were hampered when the roof also collapsed, with rubble covering emergency crews. They've now resumed their work in a bid to find more survivors. Applications have opened for funded childcare, an expansion on the government's current offer for working families. Parents of children who are older than 9 months from September are now eligible for support. Parents of 2-year-olds have been able to access 15 hours of funded childcare since last month. The full rollout will see support increase to 30 hours a week by September next year. Labour has rejected a report claiming its fair pay agreements and social care could cost taxpayers £4.2 billion a year. The party says it wants to empower adult social care professionals and the trade unions that represent them so they can negotiate better deals. The Policy Exchange think tank says the total cost of the proposed wage rise in 2023-24 would have been at least £9.9 billion per year. Labour says the claims are based on fiction and do not reflect party policy. And weather warnings for thunderstorms are in place across the country, with Britain's warm spell ending this afternoon. Temperatures are still expected to reach around 27 degrees in central parts of the country before the wet weather rolls in. The Met Office has issued new alerts for rain in southwest England. Heavy downpours are also expected to hit eastern areas of Northern Ireland, with a warning in place until 6 o'clock Tuesday morning. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Darren.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Let's get stuck into today's topics. Now, the new Labour Party MP, Natalie Elphicke, has been accused of lobbying ministers in an attempt to interfere in her former husband's sexual assault case. Then Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland alleges she asked him to move the 2020 trial of Charlie Elphicke to a lower-profile court, apparently to spare him public scrutiny. Miss Elphicke ended the marriage when her husband was convicted of sexually assaulting 2 women and jailed for 2 years. A Labour Party spokesman said she totally rejects the characterisation of the meeting. Miss Elphicke defected from the Conservatives to Labour last week. Well, joining me now is GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster. Catherine, just how serious could this be for the Labour Party? But also, my question is, the Conservatives knew about this, yet did nothing about it. Surely it's just as bad for them too.
Well, yes, of course, and that is exactly what Labour are saying. Well, if you were so bothered about this, why didn't you do something about it at the time when, according to the Sunday Times and Sir Robert Buckland, the former Justice Secretary, Natalie Elphicke, tried to get him to intervene, potentially in her husband's case, potentially moving it to a lower profile court with a lower profile judge. The paper goes on to say that after Sir Robert Buckland batted her away, said it would be totally inappropriate, and after her husband subsequently was jailed, she then tried to intervene again. Now, she didn't get to Sir Robert Buckland this time, but she got to the Chief Whip. And basically her complaint was that the conditions in prison were not good enough, that his bed was not sufficiently comfortable and that his pillows were not sufficiently comfortable. Now, a spokesman for her has said that that is absolute nonsense, but it's a really bad look, isn't it? First of all, of course, that she continued to be a Conservative MP up until Wednesday. If people in the Conservative Party knew about this, they sat on it. But also, I think, for Keir Starmer, who allegedly only found out that she wanted to come over the day before she crossed the floor. Now, there's a saying, isn't there? Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. But perhaps he's starting to wonder whether she's a bit more of a Trojan horse because she's bringing a whole load of trouble. People are saying, well, what's a right-wing MP who did nothing but rubbish Sir Keir Starmer now doing in the party? And it's upset Labour MPs as well as Conservative ones, particularly people like Rosie Duffield and Jess Phillips, because, of course, she supported her husband despite these very serious allegations. He went to jail for 2 years and she basically rubbished the victims even after he was convicted.
Yeah, I mean, do you see this rumbling on, Catherine? Do you see this turning into something quite vicious? Because, I mean, one of them has to be telling an untruth.
Well, it shows no sign of dying down, and we're 5 days into this story now. Labour will be hoping, they've made a calculation basically that most people are getting on with their lives. They're not interested in the nitty-gritty of politics, and that for most people, all they will see is a very right-wing Conservative MP on the front line of the small boats crisis, going over to Sir Keir Starmer and saying basically, Rishi Sunak has no hope of stopping the boats and I trust Labour more, something quite extraordinary. So that is what they are banking on. But I do think Labour are a bit surprised how much pushback there has been, and they show no sign of that stopping.
All right, Catherine Forster there, GB News political correspondent. Thank you very much, as ever. Let's see what my panel make of this. Political commentator Matthew Stadlin and former special advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. Matthew, I'll start with you. I know you're keen to talk about this. Where do you think, as I said there, one of them isn't actually being honest here, clearly. That's certainly the inference. Where do you think, actually, we can uncover the truth? How can we possibly?
Well, that's always a difficult question, isn't it, when you get two contradictory accounts? But politically, what I think is interesting and significant about this is I hadn't realised that Starmer was only aware of this possible defection something like 24 hours beforehand. And this idea that you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, that's one thing, but actually this might come back, and perhaps already is coming back, to haunt the Labour leader, who now finds himself and his party in the slightly absurd position of having to defend a pretty hard right MP, as I understand it, against allegations of improper behaviour. I mean, it's slightly farcical. So
do you think actually Labour have made a mistake here?
I think there's quite a good argument to suggest that they have. I mean, I get this sort of broader political point here, which is that Starmer wants to show the electorate that the Labour Party is a broad tent. It's completely different, he would like us to believe, and I think he's right on this, to the Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party. Into the last election, the Labour Party went, and I just think, yes, you want to make sure that people who haven't necessarily considered voting Labour before are prepared to put their X in the box come a general election. But at what price?
Charlie, I mean, you must be happy to see the back of her now, are you?
Well, I think, like most people, I didn't really know who she was.
Right.
But I think that doesn't take away this story, because she's becoming a household name on the back of this debacle. And I think, look, if you've got Natalie Elphicke, who was very, very clear in standing by her husband at the time, she's had to apologise for that. Without wanting to point the finger or come down on any particular side, the words of the former Justice Secretary and Chief Justice, I think Sir Robert Buckland has probably got a stronger case than Natalie's defences, given her flip-flopping over...
I'm not going to come down on a particular side, but I'll come down on a particular side.
Yes, I agree with Robert.
With that said, though, Robert Buckland knew about this. He knew he'd been asked to move Charlie Elphicke to a lower court with a lower profile in order to save his blushes, and did nothing about it. She was still a Conservative MP. No one was told about this. We don't know of any internal investigation or whatever else. So there are questions to be answered by the Conservatives as well, surely.
Well, I think it's just a question of character. And, look, the Labour leader has admitted Natalie Elphicke into the party on the back of, say, her quite bizarre stance opposing the Labour leader and opposing everything that he stands for, particularly when it comes to immigration, illegal migration, particularly when she's the MP for Dover.
Sir Softy.
Do you think her stance was bizarre because you're in favour of Keir Starmer's position on all this?
No, I struggle to see what position she has, because she's now joined the Labour leadership when she's been opposed to it, like I am, for such a long time.
Do you think actually there's something else going on here? Will we be looking at Baroness Elphicke?
Well, can I just make a wider point here? That there are certainly people on the left, perhaps on the sort of harder left of the Labour Party, who are already concerned that a Labour government might not be that different to a Conservative government. I mean, Keir Starmer said he's not going to put up taxes. So when you don't generate more money through taxation, there are limited ways in which you can do things differently. Limited ways you can do things differently when it comes to policy. Of course, you can borrow more and so forth, and you can try and grow the economy. Do people really believe that in the first couple of years of a Labour government the economy is going to go gangbusters? A word used, by the way, about the 0.6% growth we've just witnessed already on the front page of the Mail yesterday. I mean, is 0.6% really gangbusters? So I think there
but it's still higher than America and the Eurozone.
And that was undoubtedly a bit of good news for Sunak. But the idea that sort of 20 years ago, 0.6% would be celebrated as gangbusters.
Well, I agree with that.
But my wider point is this. For those on the left of the Labour Party, this will sort of really be quite triggering, I think, because it will make them think, well, what is the point? What are we really fighting for if there aren't going to be fundamental differences?
Yes. I mean, Charlie, do you recognise any differences between the Starmer position and the Conservatives?
Totally. Labour will put up your taxes. They've obviously come out to ditch...
Matthews just said they won't.
They've come up to ditch the Rwanda policy. That's something that, I think
that's a good difference.
I think that would be
a good difference.
I think that would be a backward step, taking this country back to square one, when you now have what would be a deterrent to stopping people make that perilous journey in the first place and to bust the criminal gangs, all things that the UK government is currently doing. To have this deterrent suddenly sort of ditched on day one by a Labour government, I think would be the wrong move. But I think, just to try and put it back to Natalie, there's a case in point here. Dan Poulter, Dr. Dan Poulter, who defected 2 weeks before, worked in the NHS, was something that could be heralded as by the Labour Party. They've got someone that had been a professional in the NHS, that was a Conservative, that was now saying, actually, he thinks that the NHS is in better hands with Labour. That is a blow to the Tories, to say the least. What Natalie Elphicke has done is just pure politics, I think, of the quite cheap, really, and it goes to what Sir Keir Starmer is really about, because if you can't see that it's a bit of a gimmick, and if you can't see that the public won't believe that this is an authentic sort of change in view that she's had, and she actually genuinely believes that the Labour Party is the party that's going to deal with immigration, then people can see that. And that's why the story's rumbled on for as long as it has.
I would just say on the Natalie Elphicke point, there are two ways in which this is good for Starmer and bad for Sunak. One is she's basically saying that the government is incompetent on one of its flagship policies. And by the way, it's totally for the birds what Charlie's just said about the Rwanda policy being a deterrent. And I'll explain very quickly why. I mean,
well, the Irish don't seem to think so.
Well, it's finally been dragged through the courts. We've finally got a bit of legislation that is making us all pretend that Rwanda is a safe country for people when we know it isn't. But it's not acting as... Guys, hang on. It is not acting as... it's run by a president who's got 99% of the vote. He must be a very popular man. Say that again with a straight face. No, listen, on a serious point, at the moment, we stand to have a record year for crossings. Right, so if you're going to put your X in a box according to how many fewer people are crossing the channel this year, you're not going to be voting for the Tories, because despite what is going on with the Rwanda policy, the crossings are actually going up. The other reason why this is good for Starmer and bad for the Tories is because it absolutely hammers home the point that the Tories are losing.
Well, answer that point, though, of Charlie saying that actually what we're seeing in Ireland now, with the tent cities being set up by migrants, that actually they're saying they have left the United Kingdom because they are fearful of being sent to Rwanda. So, therefore, you can't argue it's not working as a deterrent, can you?
Well, as I've said before, it may well be true that you can find some people who think of it as a deterrent and think that it actually might work and might impact them. But then, given that we've been witnessing the Rwanda shambles now for month after month after month, year after year, why do we stand on the cusp of this being the heaviest trafficking year of all across the channel?
It's been going on month after month after month, year after year after year, because the Labour Party have kept blocking it in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So now that the policy is actually on the statute book, the policy will get off the ground in 10 to 12 weeks' time. Nobody wants to see, I don't think, nobody wakes up in the morning, unless you're Suella Braverman maybe, and dreams to see a policy like this. But because of those vast numbers that you were talking about that come into this country illegally, it was about 50,000 in 2022. That came down to about 30,000 in 2023. We've got to wait to the end of the year.
Why has it gone up now, though? Why are we at the moment at record levels, as we have got to the point where Rwanda is now through the courts? Why are we now, nearly halfway through the year, standing at a record level?
Well, it may be your last chance to get into this country without going to Rwanda. But you've got to wait.
Then go on to Ireland.
You've got to wait.
And then go and set up camp in Ireland. Come on, Charlie.
You've got to wait until the end of the year to take all the figures in turn. Otherwise, you could always trace statistics about...
wait until the end of the year. Someone snookered. Snookered Sunak.
Well, by the end of the year, obviously, the Rwanda policy will be up and running. And those numbers will come down because they will be that deterrent.
There are two reasons why Sunak is waiting towards the end of the year for the election. I think we all know what they are. One is because a week is a long time in politics, and he's desperately hoping that 6 months is going to be an age in politics and enough to turn his fortunes around, and that this little bit of good news about the economy that the Mail front page was celebrating yesterday can become even better news. I still don't think people are listening. I think they've tuned out.
Yeah.
I don't think people are feeling it in their pockets. But the second reason, this is in a way, this is only speculation, but this is what I've always thought. Sunak doesn't want to be Prime Minister for less than 2 years. I think he'd see that as a humiliation. And so he won't go before the autumn. And I've said it right the way through, despite the rumours that he was going to go in May or June or what have you.
So you think January?
No, I think the autumn.
Yeah,
I think because remember he replaced Liz Truss in the autumn.
Yes,
you know,
exactly,
year and a half.
Yeah. All right. Liz Truss.
Oh, who's she?
Poor Liz.
So easily forgettable.
Right, Matthew Stadler there and Charlie Rowley before him. Thank you very much to the two of you. Now, folks, for all the best analysis and opinion on that story and more, you can go to our website, gbnews.com. Now, there's still plenty of time to win our biggest cash prize so far, a whopping £20,000. Imagine having that in your bank account this summer. But you've got to be in the draw for a chance to win it, and here's how.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far. A totally terrific £20,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer spectacular. You could use that cash to splash out on a holiday, make the garden glam, buy a new car, or just save it for a rainy day. Whatever you'd spend £20,000 on, make sure you don't miss the chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Ooh. Now, folks, you're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Lots more coming up on today's show. Susan Hall, she stood for London Mayor, and she said that Wes Streeting of Labour put her in danger by claiming that a victory for Miss Hall in the London mayoral election would be a win for racists, white supremacists and Islamophobes. Should the Shadow Health Secretary apologise? All of that and more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Rishi Sunak has come out fighting and declared war on what he's called the UK's sick note culture. The country's welfare state bill costs the average taxpayer now £2,000 every single year for every British taxpayer. Astonishing numbers, Catherine, simply mind-bending. 69 billion quid every year now goes on benefits. I paid my tax bill last month. Where did your tax go? I clicked on it. Long-term sickness and benefits is now second only to the NHS on what we spend our tax pound on. This is simply unsustainable.
That's exactly what the Prime Minister said. 69 billion a year on long-term sick and disability benefits, projected to rise to 90 billion by the end of the next Parliament if nothing has done. As he said, it is totally, totally unsustainable. And the message from Rishi Sunak really is, tough love, you're going to take your medicine, it's going to be good for you, you may not like it. Let's have a look at what he had to say earlier.
Everyone with the potential should be supported, and not just to earn, but to contribute and belong. And we must never tolerate barriers that hold people back from making their contribution and from sharing in that sense of self-worth that comes from feeling part of being something bigger than ourselves. And that is why this is a moral mission, and why the value of work is so central to my vision for welfare reform.
Certainly, Rishi Sunak said in the speech, in the period since the pandemic, something has gone wrong. Of course, millions of people had their wages paid by furlough. Now, that was an entirely artificial situation in an exceptional circumstance, but quite a lot of people left the workplace and simply haven't come back.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Susan Hall, she said Wes Streeting of Labour, his shadow health secretary, put her in danger by claiming that a victory for Miss Hall in the London mayoral election would be a win for racists, white supremacists and Islamophobes. The Conservative candidate for City Hall, who was beaten by Sadiq Khan, said that the despicable comment by the shadow health secretary had led to her feeling unsafe on public transport, and she actually suggested he order an apology. Let's see what my panel make of this. I mean, Matthew, would you be comfortable telling Charlie Rowley he's Islamophobe, a racist, a white supremacist? He voted for Susan Hall.
No, I wouldn't, no.
I mean, so surely it follows that Wes Streeting ought to apologise.
I wasn't impressed by that contribution by Wes Streeting. I mean, I'm on a sticky wicket today. Both of these topics are relatively hard to defend, coming from a sort of left-leaning perspective. Because I think, as we were discussing, that Starmer's got himself into potentially a bit of hot water over the Natalie Elphicke adoption, as it were, and now this Wes Streeting story is gaining a bit of pace because Susan Hall has decided to come out now and say her bit about it.
We've got the tweet on screen here. Wes Streeting says, a win for Susan Hall and the Conservatives is a win for racists, white supremacists and Islamophobes the world over. He thinks we've got global reach. Susan Hall's campaign has been fought from the gutter with dangerous and divisive politics. London, we cannot let her win. Vote City.
Well, he doubled down on it as well,
yes,
Wes Streeting. He did. And he used some examples of racists backing Susan Hall. There's no doubt that there are plenty of racists who would have wanted her to win because they didn't want Sadiq Khan to win. But that language that he used, I have to say, I didn't support.
Well, I'm sure I could point out a few dodgy people that have voted for Sadiq Khan, right?
I'm sure there are. The question is whether it sort of reaches a tipping point or not. I think that Susan Hall was a weak candidate. I mean, I've met her in a GB News context. She was very nice to me. I was astonished that the Conservatives chose her to take...
She's not going to be nice to you anymore, I have to say.
No, I'm not criticising her as a human being, but my job is to give you political analysis. Yeah. I was astonished that the Tories chose her as their candidate. Had they chosen someone with charisma and oomph, I mean, Khan might have been more seriously challenged than he was.
I'm afraid I wasn't available.
Do you accept that, though, Charlie? Do you think, actually, one, do you think Susan Hall was a weaker candidate? And secondly, do you think Wes Streeting ought to apologise for this incendiary tweet?
Well, I definitely think Wes ought to apologise. As Labour politicians go, Wes Streeting is actually quite good. You know, he does a lot of media.
This is
he's got his
politics stuff, isn't it?
Exactly, which is why I think it's below him and it's beneath him.
He's not in the NUS anymore. I think he needs to remember that.
Exactly, and therefore doubling down. You know, the first bit of criticism that he got about the flack of that tweet, then he decided to double down,
which is quite student politics.
That is very student politics, exactly. And I think I think if he was looking at himself in the mirror this morning, he would reflect and recognise that he's probably better than that.
It reminds us that you've got to be very careful with your rhetoric. When you're well, we have to be careful as media commentators, but when you are likely to become the next health secretary, when you are a very senior person in what looks likely to be the next government of this country, you do have a real responsibility to be careful with your language. And if you've made a mistake, maybe he doesn't believe he made a mistake. And as I say, I think a lot of racists would have voted for Susan Hall. But it's the point that it's suggesting that she is those things that I think is problematic, and then be big enough to say, OK, I got it wrong.
One of our viewers says you should. I think Streeting ought to apologise for his tweet. If he did, I wouldn't accept it, though, because apologies from MPs come easy. They're insincere. How dare he call me a racist, white supremacist and an Islamophobe? He should have lost the party whip. Would you go that far, Matthew?
No, I think that's going a little bit far. One thing that I did take issue with on the Susan Hall campaign, and I put it to her, was that she said, she was quoted as having said that Jews, and I'm one of them, are or should be afraid in Khan's London.
Well, many of them are.
And I think, actually, the quote was that she should be afraid of Sadiq Khan. Now, she said to me that she didn't actually say that. They should be afraid in Sadiq Khan's London. My worry was that was somehow coupling together Sadiq Khan, who is constantly attacked by racists and Islamophobes for the fact that he is Muslim, and suggesting that somehow he's anti-Jewish because he's Muslim. She would say she was intending no such thing, and she would also say that some Jews, and this is, I'm afraid, true, are scared in London because of these marches.
Well, but this goes to the point about security, because where there are many people of whatever religion that feel unsafe in London for whatever reasons, and we can debate those, the point that Susan's making is that she feels unsafe now travelling on public transport on the back of Wes's tweet, who, by the way, had people... they didn't turn up to his house. They thought that they'd turn up to his house, this eco-mob.
Yes, which is appalling.
Which is appalling. So he would know better, or should know better, having had this eco-loons turn up to what wasn't his property, but they said that it was, that they were outside his front door. He knows only too well, as someone, as an MP, a Member of Parliament, as a shadow cabinet minister, the threat that they're all under, the threats that they can face by people of the public. So the idea to tweet something as crass as he did and to put Susan in this now very unsafe position because she feels scared to take public transport, I think that's just something that politicians have to...
from him, were you, Sir Keir Starmer?
No, but I would, if you are wanting to be, as he continues to tell us, obviously the next Prime Minister, but former Director of Public Prosecutions, someone that is always fair and someone that talks about justice, because that's what he wants in many things, I would ask him to talk to Wes, or if I were him, I would talk to Wes and ask Wes to apologise, because it's quite clear that tweet is unacceptable.
Can I just quickly say, maybe he was feeling defensive on behalf of Sadiq Khan, who it is absolutely, there's no doubt about this, has received horrific racism and himself has to go around with security simply because he happens to be Muslim.
Right, Anton says Streeting should apologise. There's nothing wrong with what the lady has said and all the rest of it. So, well, we'll leave that to the viewers to decide. You're with me, though, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Plenty more coming up on today's show. First of all, though, here's the news with Tatiana.
Darren, thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Claims a British-Israeli hostage has died in Gaza are being urgently investigated by the Foreign Office. Hamas says Nadav Popplewell, who was kidnapped during the October attack in Israel, was injured during an airstrike a month ago. Undated footage of the 51-year-old with a black eye was also released. The government says it's seeking more information after the terrorist group made the claim in a video. Tory defector Natalie Elphicke denies she lobbied the Justice Secretary over her then-husband's sex offences trial. Sir Robert Buckland claims the MP, who crossed the floor to Labour, requested the case be moved to a lower-profile court. Speaking to the Sunday Times, he says she was told the request was completely inappropriate. Her spokesperson refuted the accusation in the Mail on Sunday, describing it as nonsense. Applications have opened for funded childcare, part of an expansion of the government's current offer for working families. Parents of children who are older than 9 months from September are now eligible for support. The full rollout will see support increase to 30 hours a week by September next year. Weather warnings for thunderstorms are in place across the country, with Britain's warm spell set to end this afternoon. The Met Office has issued a new alert for rain in southwest England. Eastern areas of Northern Ireland can also expect a heavy downpour, with a warning in place until 6 a.m. on Tuesday. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Darren.
Thanks as ever, Tatiana. Now remember, folks, you can let me know your thoughts on all the stories we've been discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say. I've got the conversation open right here, or message us on our socials. We're at GB News. Now, there's lots more coming up on this show. Thousands of people have been protesting in the Swedish city of Malmö against Israel's participation in the Eurovision Song Contest. Now, of course, that comes after the Hamas attack on October 7th and the interaction in Gaza subsequently. That's casting a shadow over that final of that glitzy contest. What do you all make of it? All of that and more to come. I'm Darren Grimes and you're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to your GB News weather update by the Met Office. Sunny spells for some, but also some scattered heavy thunderstorms, but it is going to be feeling warm, very warm for some of us. High pressure still in charge, especially across eastern parts. That's gradually clearing its way eastwards. We do have some weather fronts to give a focus of some heavy rain, especially across Northern Ireland, later into Scotland as well. But we do have weather warnings in force for thunderstorms across much of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and into Scotland later. So we are going to see some heavy downpours, torrential with thunder, lightning and hail. Further towards the south and east though, plenty of sunshine on offer, feeling warm with highs of up to 27, possibly 28 degrees. So heavy showers continuing tonight with the risk of thunder and lightning. They're going to be pulling their way northwards, affecting much of northern England and into Scotland later with heavy rain here as well. Elsewhere, turning drier into the night, some low cloud across western parts, but otherwise temperatures are still holding up at around 11 or 12 degrees. So a mild start as we go through Monday, but a bit of an east and west split. Many places across eastern parts are seeing a dry day once again, but further towards the west, we've got low pressure in charge, bringing outbreaks of heavy and persistent rain, especially across southwest England, Wales and Northern Ireland, feeling cooler for all as well, and with a bit of a breeze across eastern coasts.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, Eurovision's slogan may well be united by music, but this year, it was anything but. A scandal and chaos engulfed the competition. In the end, it was Switzerland act Nemo, they finally found Nemo, who walked away with the trophy, the country's first win since they won with Celine Dion. But all eyes were on Israel's with Eden Golan, who placed 5th. Her act was booed by fans in the arena, but she scored 323 points from the public vote, with a full 12 points coming from UK viewers. I say well done to each and every one of you. Now, we're joined by GB News reporter Charlie Peters, who's in Malmö. I mean, Charlie, it looks like a scorcher out there. It's hotter than it is in this studio, and that's saying something.
Yeah, it's gorgeous here in sunny Sweden, and it's been a quiet day in comparison to the utter chaos that came upon Malmö yesterday in the afternoon as protesters gathered just a couple hundred metres away from where I am now and started that long march from the city centre towards the west of the town before some of them migrated over towards Malmö's arena at 9 p.m. ahead of the start of the grand final. Of course, when that started, I think you and I were live at the time, Darren, because there was a significant police presence as a scuffle kicked off between the pro-Palestine protesters and the police on duty there. Both Danish and Swedish police gathered last night for a very serious police and security operation. They didn't pull any punches. All the resources that you'd anticipate for such a high-profile event were in place. But it wasn't just the scuffles outside the arena that's caught much of the world's attention. It's also what happened inside, because there were some protests from the crowd, the booing, as you've mentioned, of Eden Golan during her performance, then finally finishing second from the silent European majority in that voting. But also we heard some political statements from those on the stage, other contestants making statements such as, peace will triumph over hate and other similar statements. You also saw the Irish contestant having the words ceasefire written on their costume. Now, of course, before the Eurovision final went ahead, some of the contestants had signed a letter demanding a ceasefire in the war, and I'm sure that both the political offices of Hamas and Israel listened to that demand very keenly. But so far it has been ignored and the war continues. But it was very much the war in Gaza and indeed the treatment of Eden Golan here in Malmö that attracted much of the attention at last night's performance. They say it's united by music, but really it was disunited by geopolitics.
Indeed, Charlie Peters, very well said, very beautifully put. Thank you very much for that update. So some of our comments coming in about this, and Arthur is delighted actually that Ireland was, put in their box by being beaten by Israel in that overall score, especially thanks to the public vote. That's what put Israel up there. Let's see what my panel make of that. Well, Matthew, did you watch Eurovision?
Well, first of all, I would never watch Eurovision.
Shame.
Completely unwatchable. From the clips that I saw of it on WhatsApp groups, it was a sort of enormous amount of nudity and sort of sexual content, when you know that little girls and boys up and down the continent are going to be watching. So what is all that about? Sorry, I've got sun cream in my eyes. But the other reason I wouldn't watch Eurovision is because who makes the best pop music in the world? We do, right?
Yes.
Britain. We can proudly say that on Britain's news channel. But you wouldn't know it if you watched Eurovision, because our contestants that never seem to win, or hardly ever seem to win, and also our acts that we choose don't seem to be particularly representative of the genius that keeps getting pumped out from these shores. So Eurovision, to me, is a sort of gimmicky nonsense. The thing that I did take very seriously, actually, was the hounding of this 20-year-old Israeli contestant, which I thought was thoroughly disgraceful. Now, we have to say every time we talk about what Israel is doing in Gaza, how horrific October the 7th was. It was absolutely beyond our imagination. However, I am deeply opposed to what Israel is doing in Gaza, and I predicted it, and I've thought this all the way through. That doesn't mean that you hound a 20-year-old woman who is not responsible for any of this, and it is particularly jarring and I think grotesque when you consider the acts of extreme sexual violence that were carried out against young Israeli women, many of them at this music festival on October the 7th. I mean, do these people have no shame? Of course, fine, find the right context in which to protest the horrors of what is happening to Gazan women and children, but to almost stalk this 20-year-old Israeli is disgusting.
Yeah, she had to have the maximum security. She had Israelis MI5 or actually there with her in Malmö. Charlie, though, do you think actually one of our viewers has suggested that actually the agitators that take to the streets and are creating the noise that is actually I think, intimidation towards a 20-year-old.
She couldn't leave her hotel room.
No. And all of these... But the people taken to the streets, both in Britain and in Malmö, they are in the minority because, actually, the public vote for Israel was incredibly strong. Would that not suggest that, actually, we don't have as big an issue as we may well think by a very vocal minority?
I think that's probably true, yes. But I can't echo what Matthew just said enough. It is a music competition. It is something that is supposed to bring light and hope across to the world through music. The grandstanding, frankly, of whether you're other competitors that had to be thrown out, whether you were reporters supposed to be bringing the results who had to be stood down on the day through protest because of what they see as in terms of Israel's actions. It is grandstanding on their part. These people should stick to the music, and everybody should recognise that this girl, this young girl, brilliant singer, at the age of 20, was representing her country, which she was absolutely entitled to do. She should be able to do that without any kind of fear or intimidation whatsoever. And the people that were protesting, or the people that made her feel unsafe, have got an awful lot to answer for.
Stick to the music, Charlie, but I don't want that Irish non-binary thing ever creating music ever again, to be perfectly honest.
I don't think we want to call human beings things.
Non-binary?
No, but I wouldn't call people things. Listen,
what do you call a non-binary person?
A person, but not a thing. Listen, I will just make I hope is an important point. Having condemned the hounding of this particular woman, this young woman, I would say that there are absolutely legitimate arguments around whether cultural boycotts should be instituted against particular countries. There's a perfectly reasonable case to be made for a boycott of some sort against Israel. People will fall down on different sides of that. And I've just been in Pretoria in South Africa receiving on behalf of my late father the highest honour that the South African state bestows for his work telling the story of the struggle against apartheid. It was a great privilege. I was there, presented it by the President Ramaphosa. But next to me, in line, was the son receiving an award on behalf of his father, who had been central to the Stop the Tour protests in New Zealand, where rugby is a religion, to try and stop the New Zealanders going to apartheid South Africa. And there was a real strength to that anti-apartheid Stop the Tour movement, where there were these sporting boycotts that helped, you might argue, bring an end to that appalling regime in South Africa. I'm not comparing Israel to South Africa. I'm saying that there is sometimes a need for cultural and sporting boycotts. Whether Israel is right for that, there'll be a big debate about it.
Yes, I don't think that the two things are the same as each other, but yeah. Right, Gemma says, totally agree, Eurovision was totally sexualised last night. If I had small children watching, I would have turned it over. Right.
It's the only reason I tuned in.
Oh, for goodness sake. Right, folks, you're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Lots more coming up on today's show. Why is TV presenter James May telling everyone to stop panicking over pub closures? It keeps me awake at night, James. All of that and more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Today is a good day for the King, a good day for Britain. I'm sure you'll be hoping that those Not My King morons decide to give it a rest for a little while, because he is still dealing with an illness, isn't he?
He's still dealing with an illness, and he appears to be dealing extremely well. I think he comes from the fact that he's extremely strong and fit. I think I understand that will help his treatment enormously. And I think, as your professor was saying, it's the fatigue that can be a brutal thing when you're trying to lead a normal life with cancer. But I think that it's going to really help him psychologically to get out there, and people are going to be giving him enormous support. I mean, I know, as you say, there's an anti-monarchy brigade, but there's been an anti-monarchy brigade since there's been a monarchy. So that is not such a big deal. It has always been there. I feel that Charles is going to get a lot of support from the sort of joyousness of people seeing him. and wishing him well. And I think that that's going to be immensely important to him. It's a very busy time, but I think a boost for William and Kate. William's out and about. We don't know about Kate, but I feel that the King will definitely. It's a very busy time coming up with the anniversary of D-Day in Normandy, which I know he will be desperate to be a part of. Then there's the big royal season, the trooping the colour, the Garter ceremony, royal ascot, and then he is hosting the Emperor and Empress of Japan at the end of June. So it's a absolutely packed month for someone that is presumably going to get very tired.
Yes, indeed. I mean, if he gets through all of that, I think that will be absolutely massive, won't it?
Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Stop panicking over pub closures. That's the plea of James May. The TV presenter co-owns a hostelry and claims it's the bad ones that don't survive and believes Britain is oversubscribed with watering holes and the sector's struggles are simply a cull that will eliminate bad pubs. Let's see what my panel makes of that. Charlie, I'm worried about the lack of pubs, closure of pubs. When you see a beautiful old pub that's been around for goodness only knows how long, shutting its doors because it's no longer commercially viable, I find that really, really quite upsetting.
Yes, me too. I think that's a little bit strong from James there, I have to say, who I know very well, obviously.
But tell him when
I next see him, I'll make my views known. But I don't think you can ever have too many watering holes because they are cultural institutions. This country we have a proud tradition of pubs. They were the heart of communities. There are centre points where people gather around, have a drink, talk about the week's events, talk about what's happening in their lives. They're social hubs.
Have government done enough, do you think, to actually help them out?
Well, I think that I'm struggling a little bit because I think there will be occasions where people have tried to run a venture, whether it be a pub, a restaurant, or anything sort of like that in the hospitality sector, and it hasn't become commercially viable because of costs, because of bad accounting, or because of bad business people. That is just a fact of life. That happens in every sector. So there will be pubs that are closing because they've been poorly run. But I do think there will be occasions where people are forced out of the market. So if local councils aren't being able to pass on business rates, for example, maybe central government can do more. It always tries to do more to cut beer duty and things like that to keep pubs going. So I don't think it's necessarily just as plain as what James is saying, is that, bad pubs will just inevitably be falling by the wayside.
The idea that you two gentlemen, you raging capitalists, support the government stepping in to protect pubs seems to me to be particularly peculiar. If a pub isn't commercially viable, it has to be allowed to fail.
Well, Sadiq Khan, he has a nighttime czar that he pays well over 100 grand.
Yes.
And businesses are going under like you wouldn't believe in London.
She's a real nightmare.
What's your point?
Well, the point is that Labour aren't exactly helping out these businesses, are they? So
I'm saying that pubs should not be protected by the state. I'm all for a pub.
But I'm not suggesting that we subsidise pubs.
Well, that has been suggested. That's what James May is railing against. Although I have to say, it's all very well for James May and presumably his very posh gastropub. But if a pub is not fit for purpose, and May makes this point, you've got to have decent, clean loos and a clean pub. And also, realistically, in this day and age, times change. You've got to put on some decent grub as well if you want it to survive. We can't have the government stepping in to save our pubs. And anyway, my understanding over the last 10, 20 years or whatever it is, as a percentage, we haven't lost that many pubs, so they're not going under anytime soon.
I hope not. As a man that likes a drink, I can't cope with the prospect. I do, actually, yes. But it's synonymous with Britain, is it not? And I'm not suggesting for a second that we subsidise them or anything like that, but we help them through tax relief and things like that, surely.
Yeah, I think, I think there'll be costs that, pubs have had to encounter, so importing sort of barrels and beers and all the rest of it, that has had an impact on the, the global markets. Inflation obviously hasn't helped.
Yes.
And you've got to have people coming through the doors. It is actually, what I don't want to see where we could be heading for is where people, and it happens already, but too many people, I think, drink at home. And they preload because you can get cheap booze in supermarkets. People don't go to their pubs anymore because actually the cost of a pint, particularly in London, is above and beyond.
I agree.
Because they're social hubs. They're for people to come.
But the idea that we've got to have people coming through the door, you sound like some sort of hard-left raging socialist now.
We'll talk about it over a pint after this.
You sound like the man in the pub.
Thank you very much to my panel there, Charlie Rowley and Matthew Stadlin. You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Lots more coming up on the show. First of all, though, we're going to get a look at the weather with Catherine.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. For the outlook, drier in the east but turning unsettled in the west and also feeling cooler as we go into Monday. So high pressure is going to be moving its way eastwards. We do have some weather fronts that's bringing a focus for some showers or longer spells of rain through the rest of today. And we do have some warnings in force as well for thunderstorms. Thunderstorms are going to be pushing their way northwards, affecting northern England and also into Scotland. Some of these are going to be quite heavy at times, giving hail and thunder. Elsewhere, turning drier, some low cloud across western parts, clearest in the east, but temperatures still ranging around 10 or 11 degrees. So it is going to be a mild start as we start Monday, but a bit of an east-west split in the weather. Once that low cloud generally clears across much of England and Wales, it will turn drier and brighter. Showers coming into Scotland, but further west we have an area of low pressure bringing outbreaks of rain across Northern Ireland, western parts of England and also into South Wales too. So it is going to be feeling cooler for all, highs of up to maybe 20 or 22 degrees. As we go through Tuesday, that rain shifts its focus further towards the north and east with showers following, and then that really sets the scene for the outlook as well. So longer spells of rain on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, sunny spells, scattered showers, not as warm but still highs of 20 or 21 degrees.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Lots more coming up on today's show. The Welsh Government, they're using satellites to spy on homeowners with big gardens as it seeks to overhaul council tax. And Starmer is considering bringing in the measures to England. All of that and more to come. I'm Darren Grimes, and you're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £20,000 in tax-free cash to play with this summer. What would you spend that on? Well, whilst you're thinking about it, listen to some of our previous winners getting that winning phone call from us.
I'm Charles. I'm on £18,000 cash. It was just amazing, and as soon as it goes into your bank account, it just changed. It's a life-changing thing. Just go for it. It's an absolute You must try and go for it.
The next winning call could be answered by you. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here. This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out. Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other. Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hello and a very warm welcome back to GB News Sunday. Thank you very much for your company this lunchtime. I'm Darren Grimes, and for the next hour, I'll be keeping you company on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up in this hour, the Welsh Government is using satellites to spy on homeowners with big gardens as it seeks to overhaul council tax. And Starmer is considering bringing in the measures to England. Could Sir Keir be spying on a neighbourhood near you? Then civil service diversity jobs will be banned in a new crackdown on Whitehall woke spending in a radical overhaul aimed at ending the backdoor politicisation of the civil service. But should the government be focusing on more important matters than battling the woke nonsense? What say you? And churches, universities and hospitals can apply for a free-framed official portrait of King Charles to display as the government expands its £8 million scheme to cement public support for the monarchy. But is this nothing but an outdated, expensive practice? Do you want a portrait of Charlie Boy? Let me know, gbnews.com/your say. Let me give you your views on all the stories we've been discussing, or message me on our socials. We're at GB News. First of all, though, we're going to get you news with Tatiana.
Darren, thank you. The top stories at 2:01. Claims a British-Israeli hostage has died in Gaza are being urgently investigated by the Foreign Office. Hamas says Nadav Popplewell, who was kidnapped during the October attack in Israel, was injured during an airstrike a month ago. Undated footage of the 51-year-old with a black eye was also released. The government says it's seeking more information after the terrorist group made the claim in a video. Deputy Foreign Secretary Andrew Mitchell is condemning the actions of Hamas.
My heart goes out to the family at this extraordinary time with the barbarism of these appalling terrorists who have treated the family in such a cynical, cruel and heartless way, and we must wait for further information to become available. But what an appalling, dreadful experience for this poor family to have to suffer at the hands of this absolutely dreadful terrorist organisation.
Tory defector Natalie Elphicke denies she lobbied the Justice Secretary over her then-husband's sex offences trial. Sir Robert Buckland claims the MP, who crossed the floor to Labour, requested the case be moved to a lower-profile court. Speaking to the Sunday Times, he says she was told the request was completely inappropriate. Her spokesperson refuted the accusation, describing it as nonsense in the Mail on Sunday. Ms Elphicke ended the marriage when her husband was convicted of sexually assaulting 2 women and jailed for 2 years. At least 7 people have been killed and 17 injured after an apartment block in Russia collapsed. State media says fragments of a Ukrainian missile, which were downed by Russia's air defence system, landed on the building in the city of Belgrade. Rescue efforts were hampered when the roof also collapsed, with rubble covering emergency crews. They've now resumed their work in a bid to find more survivors. Applications have opened for funded childcare, an expansion on the government's current offer for working families. Parents of children who are older than 9 months from September are now eligible for support. Parents of 2-year-olds have been able to access 15 hours of funded childcare since last month. The full rollout will see support increase to 30 hours a week by September next year. Labour has rejected a report claiming its fair pay agreements in social care could cost taxpayers £4.2 billion a year. The party says it wants to empower adult social care professionals and the trade unions that represent them so they can negotiate better deals. The Policy Exchange think tank says the total cost of the proposed wage rise in 2023 to 2024 would have been at least £9.9 billion per year. Labour says the claims are based on fiction and do not reflect party policy. Weather warnings for thunderstorms are in place across the country, with Britain's warm spell ending this afternoon. Temperatures are still expected to reach around 27 degrees in central parts of the country before the wet weather rolls in. The Met Office has issued new alerts for rain in southwest England. Heavy downpours are also expected to hit eastern areas of Northern Ireland, with a warning in place until 6 a.m. on Tuesday. And 2 skydivers have become the first to navigate their way through Tower Bridge wearing wingsuits. The pair from Austria jumped from a helicopter and flew across the River Thames, reaching a top speed of 152 miles per hour before successfully winging their way between the bridge towers. The stunt followed extensive training in Oxfordshire, which involved the use of cranes to simulate the structure. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Darren.
Thanks as ever, Tatiana. We'll get stuck into today's topics now. The Welsh Government is using satellites to spy on homeowners with big gardens. This comes as it seeks to overhaul council tax. The Telegraph claim that by using satellites, Welsh Labour are targeting families who live in areas with good schools or lower crime rates to hit them with higher council tax bills. These are under plans being drawn up by the Senate. Sir Keir Starmer insisted that Labour will not raise taxes, but he's also said that the Welsh Government is a blueprint for what Labour can do across the United Kingdom. So it begs the question, could Sir Keir Starmer soon be spying on a neighbourhood near you? Now, joining me now is GB News' political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, you've already got the tarpaulin up in your garden, covering it in preparation, haven't you?
If only I had a house sufficiently grand and big to be really affected by this, Darren. But yes, this is what's going on in Labour-run Wales. 1.5 million homes, and the Valuation Office, as part of HMRC, have been tasked with looking at the houses in Wales because they want to review the council tax bans that was last done in Wales about 20 years ago, because they say they want to address property, wealth and rebalance the current system. So they're looking at things like the rates of crime, they're looking at things like if you live near a good school, and they're using satellites to see how big the plot of land is, whether you've put an extension on in the last 20 years, etc., etc. So they're looking at you from above, from the sky. Now, of course, the Conservatives have jumped on this and said, aha, look, if Labour get into power in the United Kingdom as a whole, this is what is coming your way. So Michael Gove, the Housing Secretary, has said these Big Brother tactics will punish families with higher bills simply for having good schools or lower crimes. Now, I think it is worth saying that council tax bans in England were currently set with the value of people's properties back in 1991, so nearly a third of a century ago, and a lot of people's houses will have changed since then. And also there is a feeling, certainly in the Treasury, that it benefits people unduly with bigger homes and unduly punishes people sort of at the bottom end of the scale. So the Treasury have suggested to numerous chancellors that it is worth addressing, but David Cameron didn't want to go there. Tony Blair didn't go there because it's politically difficult. So it's happening in Wales, but would Sir Keir Starmer do it in England? They've said they've got no plans to, but they haven't ruled it out either.
Indeed. Catherine Forster there, GB News political correspondent. Thank you as ever. My panel now are still here. Charlie Rowley, former SPAD to Michael Gove, and, of course, Matthew Stadlin, broadcaster. Now, Charlie, I'm wondering, do you think, because Catherine made the point there that actually they haven't been updated, these council tax bans, since 1991. Now, is that before you were put on this planet, Natalie?
I was.
You were here.
I arrived.
For very long.
I arrived a year earlier.
So, but surely that begs the question: something needs to change, right? It needs reform, but I don't know whether or not it needs Sir Keir lending an eye from a satellite, saying your garden's looking nice.
Well, just when I thought, the Labour Party couldn't look down on you anymore, they've now actually come up with a policy to make sure that they can do that in practice. It's ridiculous. You are going to be spied on. The idea also that Labour-run Wales is going to be a blueprint for the nation. It has the worst ratings in terms of the NHS right across the country, so that really does need to be addressed. And I think people should be looking long and hard at the Welsh Labour government to make sure that those kind of practices don't come into the UK. But it is a farce. People, you can do it in a different way. You can always try and change the council tax bans. You can do but it is effectively a tax on aspiration and trying to increase taxes on people who have worked hard, saved hard all of their lives to have a decent standard of living, communities that have created good schools, good communities, and they are now going to face a hike in their taxes by what could be an incoming Labour government.
How can you possibly say that this is a tax or would be a tax on aspiration? So much of our wealth in this country is entrenched in our property. If you remember back in 2015, Ed Miliband was talking about a mansion tax, and Vince Cable floated before that the idea of a mansion tax. Now, there are all sorts of problems with that. But as we've just been hearing, the council tax bans haven't been played around with for, 33 years. Let me answer your point, because it's an important one. People go out to work and work incredibly hard and get taxed on their income. Surely it is better to tax a little bit more progressively and fairly on property through council tax than it is to tax hard-working people like yourself or Darren. I'll leave myself out of it for the current purposes on your income. The income tax obviously is necessary, But high income tax, you can make a much more persuasive case of being a tax on aspiration rather than taxing a little bit more on property, so that someone in a massive house doesn't pay roughly the same as someone who's in a much smaller property.
But you often find, sorry, just to be honest, you often find people in these big houses, if they are big houses and they are very lucrative because they are assets. These people might be asset rich, but they are cash poor.
That's exactly right.
And that's where the money goes to die, doesn't it? Because you have people whose properties have boomed, sitting on these mountains of cash that are untapped.
But then if you're taxing them again, if you're increasing the taxes on their asset, which is their home, which they're going to pass on to the next generation in terms of inheritance, you are taxing, you're giving people a double whammy. So it is easy tax.
You'd rather raise, if you want better public services, you'd rather raise income tax.
No,
Are you prepared to pay more income tax than you already are?
No, I would like to see increased investment in this country from abroad. That's why we have a brilliant trade secretary, and that's why we've got a brilliant trade operation across the UK to make sure that we're getting that inward investment. I'd want to see lower taxes to increase innovation.
Fairer taxes of trade
to turbocharge the economy.
Fairer taxes, that's all fine. I'm very pro-investment and all the rest of it. We're all pro-growth. It's a question of how we get there. But in terms of a tax system, we know that tax has to happen, has to be levied. Surely a more progressive approach is to tap into untapped wealth rather than hammering people who are working 10, 12-hour days to put bread on the table.
But a few things I would say, though. We've already got council tax bans, right? So the people would already argue that bigger houses are paying.
But they're a farce. They're a farce because the difference is I live in a decent-sized house in London, right? Yeah. And I pay a negligible amount of council tax. And it's particularly when you compare what I pay to someone who lives in a much smaller property. Would this affect me? It absolutely would affect me. And when Ed Miliband was talking about a mansion tax, which would have also affected me, not because I live in a mansion, but I live in central London, I still voted Labour because I want to live in a marginally fairer society.
Okay. You are, but you are. I will. Get you out. You are a hard-working person. You work incredibly hard, and I see that every day when we sort of do these discussions. But you're not necessarily. You will be impacted. But think about the pensioner that has got this as an asset. They will be hit the hardest.
You can protect them, because it's a really important point that you raised.
You'll be taxing pensioners.
This would be true of a mansion tax, and no one's talking about a mansion tax anymore. Although a lot of people think we should be. You can bring in protections so that you absolutely do not have a situation where
that's not what they're saying in Wales.
Let me finish. Where a GB News viewer at home who might be a pensioner is not going to be turfed out of their house because their property went up.
They're going to be spied on.
Through no fault of their own. They're not going to be turfed out of their house if they can't afford to pay a higher band of council. There would have to be safeguards in place. Of course there would.
And then you've got HMRC apparently snooping through your bank account as well. It just feels like we're...
Well, on the spy thing, this is a sensationalist headline from The Telegraph. They're using technology to try and understand how big people's properties are. By the way, I haven't got my tarpaulin up. Some of your comments today, Darren,
yes.
It's as though you're auditioning to be a stand-up comedian. I'm chuckling away in the breaks.
Well, Jonathan says, Darren, this garden thing terrifies me. I spent my savings buying a piece of land beside my small garden from the local farmer to plant as woodland for the benefit of wildlife and the environment. It has no financial value, and I can barely afford it as it is. Another tax that would break me.
Look, don't bother about the size of the garden. It's really straightforward. If you live in a big, expensive house, you should pay progressively more in tax. Right. And not a huge amount, but progressively more than someone who lives in a smaller house. Okay. It's simple. It's not rocket science.
All right. Well, Sir Keir Starmer's going to be very busy on Google Maps in number 10 Downing Street, apparently. But anyway, we'll move on. Folks, yes, Suella Braverman has called for the Conservatives to abolish the two-child benefit cap due to thousands of families losing around £3,200 annually in a dramatic rebuke of her own party's record on the welfare state. Now, the former Home Secretary is urging Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to scrap the cap, which limits the amount of households can claim in benefits from the Department for Work and Pensions. I want to know, is she right? I know there's diverging opinion, mixed opinion on gbnews.com/your say about this. Some people saying if you can't afford to have children, then you ought not to have children. And others, and I think I'm sort of coming round to this view, saying, hang on a minute, we need to have more children in this country. Where are you
I
at?
nearly fell off my chair having my porridge this morning when I discovered that Suella Braverman is now to the left of the Labour Party on welfare. I mean, I thought this was absolutely out of the blue, completely extraordinary. Rishi Sunak must be tearing out his immaculately coiffed hair over his morning coffee, because this person, who he sacked as Home Secretary, just comes back to bite him in the bottom time and time again. But I think the really interesting political thing here is, to make a serious point, the Labour Party, as I understand it, would not scrap this policy, would they?
No.
They would keep it in place, this two-child limit. And when it came in, the people on the left, certainly me, thought this was a deeply cruel policy, the idea that you'd be penalising children. It's not a child's fault that the third child in a family that might not be able to afford them is born. Why punish a child? And Suella Braverman, for goodness sake, for once I actually agree with her, is suggesting that this might be one way of pulling more children out of poverty. And so on this, congratulations to her.
Pete says the two-child cap must stay. There's a lot of people who think actually it's deeply unfair that the state should have to fund all of your kids if you're going hell for leather and having more of them than perhaps you can afford.
Well, I think that's right. And I think, look, we were talking about the economy a second ago and just, 0.6% growth. And we want to see the economy to continue to grow. Now, it's a very, very turbulent situation as it is. We all know that. So I think the idea that you start removing things that could ultimately increase the benefit bill or the welfare bill would not be the right thing to do.
Do you want more migration? You'd like more migration, would you? More immigration?
I'm pro this cap.
If we don't have children, Charlie, how are we going to afford to pay for our elder people?
I'm all in favour of the Australian points-based system that we have in this country, which allows us to pick and choose who needs to come into this country to fill those jobs, to plug those holes where there are gaps. But I'm also in favour of making sure that where we do have people off sick, out of work, for whatever reason, the most economically inactive people, students or whatever, we're getting them trained up in the jobs that need doing in the first place without having to rely necessarily on immigration.
I just think it is a really appalling policy, and I'm ashamed that the incoming Labour government, if it is incoming, is not going to reverse this, because I repeat the point, if you are a child, a third child, why should you, and actually, as a knock-on effect, your siblings, be plunged into poverty because your parents have decided to have a third child when perhaps they couldn't really afford it? It's not your fault.
Well, Gary's saying that actually it encourages people to stay on benefits. It creates a dependency on the welfare state. And if you're brought up in that environment, then perhaps you just go on to benefits in the future in your own life.
If you get rid of the cap?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a fair... I mean, look, I'm not a parent, so and I don't envisage having kids anytime soon, so I don't really know what it's like to think about that. But what I do think it is about fairness. And I think, yes, if you're a family and you've got two kids, the state has supported you as it could to help your kids to a certain point. But I think there has to be an element of responsibility on the parents to look after their kids, to be able to fund and support them. There'll be other benefits, of course, through schools, through breakfast clubs, after-school dinner clubs, if they need support with kids in those kinds of areas. But there comes a point where you just have to say, it's over to you as parents to take responsibility for your family and your future.
And to hell with the children.
Right-o. John has said...
Well, that's not quite... That's not quite... That's not what I... That's not...
It's the effect of it.
Well, it's not, because it's making people... No, because it's making people think...
You're punishing children for something that they're not responsible for.
I'm not punishing children. How can you punish a child if your family are able to support them? And that should be the right...
The point is they're not able to, because some families have children and perhaps financially it might not have been the most sensible idea. It's not the child's fault, is my point.
But then it's also not my responsibility or Darren's or yours...
It is our responsibility
to have our taxpayers... to have our taxes being funded on people that...
I'll tell you, very quickly, I'll tell you why it is our responsibility, because where parents fail, and I'm a parent and I hope I don't fail, and I'm not saying that parents might not fail, it is the role of society to step in to protect a defenceless child.
Yes, well, one of the comments says, if Stadlin wants to pay more tax, give him an appropriate tax code, but leave the rest of us alone. That's you told. Now, for all the best analysis and opinion on that story and more, you can go to our website, gbnews.com. Now, folks, there's still plenty of time to win our biggest cash prize so far, a whopping £20,000. Imagine having that in your bank account this summer. But you've got to be in it to win it. Here's how.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far. A totally terrific £20,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer spectacular. You could use that cash to splash out on holiday, make the garden glam, buy a new car, or just save it for a rainy day. Whatever you'd spend £20,000 on, make sure you don't miss the chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Lots more coming up on today's show. Civil service diversity jobs will be banned in a new crackdown on Whitehall woke spending in a radical overhaul aimed at ending the backdoor politicisation of the civil service. But should the government be focusing on more important matters than battling woke nonsense? Does this matter to you? Let me know. All of that and more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Now, a woman who 25 years ago, at the age of just 14, tortured and killed her 71-year-old grandmother was last month released from prison on licence.
But this isn't the first time she's been let out. Sarah Davey has been bailed and reincarcerated no less than 7 times.
Well, to debate this, we're joined by former Detective Chief Inspector Colin Sutton, famed for catching the notorious killer of Millie Dowler, Levi Belfield, and GB News' own Patrick Christie's.
I think we have to qualify that where the killer is a child, and we have to accept that to consign somebody to be in prison for 60, 70 or 80 years is probably something that we ought to think twice about. So I understand why this happens. I understand the outrage. I really understand the outrage. I think that 14-year-olds who kill should be given a chance to rehabilitate? Yes, I do. Do I think that somebody who's had 7 such chances and blown them away deserves an 8th chance? Then probably I think that's a lot more doubtful.
I would have thought that by chance, sort of 3 or 4, they'd have got the picture, but clearly not. Patrick, what do you make of it all?
Well, some people are born evil, aren't they? And why should we have to suffer to have them back out on the streets? There are some crimes that are so serious that you should pay for it either with your life or for the rest of your life. This was a sadistic murder, the details of which absolutely cannot be read out on air at this particular time of day. There are 3 issues here. Is this justice for the families of victims? I just think a release like this is a slap in the face, really, to us all. It's another example of soft justice. And just because she's a child, well, she was old enough to commit the heinous crime she committed.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go. How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to a very warm GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. I am advised that it is the weather making it warm and not just Matthew Stadman's hot air. Now, the civil service diversity jobs will be banned in a new crackdown on Whitehall woke spending. This is the Telegraph reporting that a radical overhaul aimed at ending the backdoor politicisation of the civil service. Mandarins will be ordered not to hire any new staff dedicated to boosting diversity, equality and inclusion, but instead on focusing on scrapping diversity drives. So should the government be focusing on this, or more important, bigger matters perhaps? Let's see what my panel make of this. Charlie, you were in government. Did you notice a lot of this whackery and wokery over actually delivery and public service?
You do see it, yes. And I think it's... look, the Telegraph is reporting it's a cost where all these roles that are being advertised to have diversity and inclusion sort of coordinators in departments right across Whitehall and in every other institution going. It costs the taxpayer £27 million. Now, I think that money certainly can be better spent. I think everybody can agree with that, because it's fundamentally common sense. You don't employ someone necessarily because of somebody's sex or their gender or their race or whatever. You employ them because they're the best person for the job. And it's going to be Esther McVeigh, I understand, formerly of this parish, who'll be making a speech tomorrow, now the Minister for Common Sense. There you are. And she'll be giving a speech tomorrow setting this out, because it's absolutely right. You know, every penny counts, every penny. It's not government's money, it's taxpayers' money. And we don't need people to be telling employers, particularly within Whitehall in particular, the civil service, where there are some pretty brainy people around, who they should be employing and how they should be going about it.
I want to put a question from one of our viewers to Matthew, because Davey says, stopping woke nonsense is not a waste of money. These diversity offers are having to justify their unnecessary salaries by introducing stupidity into their employers' businesses. They throw common sense out of the window to justify their own existence, their office and salary. Tell us, how much does the NHS waste on diversity managers, for example?
Well, this is a great hot topic of GB News, isn't it? I mean, there are no more popular words on this channel than woke and common sense. One man's common sense is another man's something very different. My starting point is I want to live in an inclusive society, and we live already in a diverse society, and that should be represented in our workforce.
Well, I'd like the NHS to be keeping me alive.
I'd like that, but they shouldn't be incompatible, should they?
Well, they would be if you're not hiring the best people for the job and you're instead hiring them on their immutable characteristics.
Well, yes, what's certainly true is that for a long time in this country, there was a leaning towards sort of white, middle-aged blokes, a lot of whom had gone to Oxford and Cambridge. I went to Cambridge, I'm white and I'm increasingly middle-aged. Do I think I'm always the best person for a job? Absolutely not, and I'm sure 99% of your viewers would agree with that statement. My concern is whether these people are actually doing what they should be doing and whether they are having a positive impact or whether they are simply taking up the pay packet. How can I possibly comment, because I don't work with them? I don't know how effective or otherwise they are. Do I think that the civil service should be politicised? No. And is there a risk that there is a spillover into politicisation from some of these jobs? Possibly. What I care about is that we do have a properly functioning, well-run public service that does represent the country that we live in. Are these jobs the best way to reach that? I can't tell you for sure.
Well, if I can, because you mentioned the NHS, and I remember there was a story not so long ago where, because these diversity and inclusion coordinators and managers, particularly within the NHS, have sent out a diktat to doctors and nurses that have to... when you greet a patient in the ward, you have to ask now what your pronouns are.
Come on, I've been to hospital quite a bit with friends and family over the last few years. I can promise you one thing, I have never been asked by anyone in an NHS hospital what my pronouns are. And if they ask me what my pronouns are, I say, just get on and treat me or get on and treat someone else. It doesn't happen, Charlie.
Exactly. It was reported, so there must be some element of truth. It was reported, whatever the NHS Trust is, I'll Google it perhaps in another ad break. But the fact is that there are people in these roles thinking up these ideas, which will have an impact on, as you absolutely said, you just want to get treated. You don't need to be asked questions.
Something's really important. If you are from an ethnic minority, and if you have recently arrived in this country, you don't speak the language properly, in order to get the best treatment, the way that you are cared for, the way you are interacted with, is, I think, really, really important to get to the best treatment.
If I go abroad, I don't expect them to provide me with a translator and all the rest of it. The entitlement of that is staggering.
But I don't think we're talking about tourists here. We're talking about people who live here.
Well, if you come to this country, you should learn the lingo.
I agree with you, but some people won't have done because they'll have come here too recently.
Well, that's not our problem.
Of course it's our problem, because once we've accepted someone into the bosom of our great British society, they become not just our problem, but also, let's hope, contribute positively to our communities. Look, this isn't about being nasty. All you and I... surely, if we're all good people, what we want is when someone goes to the NHS to be treated, they get treated. If one way that you can ensure better treatment is the way that you interact with someone, then fantastic.
Exactly. I'm all for being a nice person and not being a nasty society, and that means eradicating racism. And I think DEI is a racist policy. I think the diversity, equity and inclusion policies are racist. But anyway, we'll move on from that.
Enough of these interactions.
You're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Plenty more to come on today's show. First of all, though, we're going to get a news update from Tatiana.
Darren, thank you very much and good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Claims a British-Israeli hostage has died in Gaza are being urgently investigated by the Foreign Office. Hamas says Nadav Popplewell, who was kidnapped during the October attack in Israel, was injured during an airstrike a month ago. Undated footage of the 51-year-old with a black eye was also released. The government says it's seeking more information after the terror group made the claim in a video. Tory defector Natalie Elphicke denies she lobbied the Justice Secretary over her then-husband's sex offences trial. Sir Robert Buckland claims the MP who crossed the floor to Labour requested the case be moved to a lower-profile court. Speaking to the Sunday Times, he says she was told the request was completely inappropriate. Her spokesperson refuted the accusation in the Mail on Sunday, describing it as nonsense. Applications have opened for funded childcare, part of an expansion of the government's current offer for working families. Parents of children who are older than 9 months from September are now eligible for support. The full rollout will see support increase to 30 hours a week by September next year. And weather warnings for thunderstorms are in place across the country, with Britain's warm spell set to end this afternoon. The Met Office has issued a new alert for rain in southwest England. Eastern areas of Northern Ireland can also expect a heavy downpour, with the warning in place until 6 a.m. on Tuesday. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks as ever, Tatiana. Now, there's plenty more coming up on today's show, but before I get on to all of that, let's get a little treat from Nana Aquia, whose show is on later at 3 o'clock. She joins us now. Nana, what have you got coming up?
Well, you just can't get rid of me, can you? I'm back again. But yeah, coming up, obviously, Sir Keir Starmer, we've got to focus on some of the stuff he's been saying. His elite sort of border command, using terror laws to tackle the boat crisis, a lot of the stuff he's saying. Just looking at other policies of his as well, like the 20% VAT on private schools, already unravelling before our very eyes. And then this latest one with Angela Rayner, her plans, or the plans that she's supporting, set to add £225 onto council tax, and the whole thing with Labour in Wales spying on people people to work out council tax bans. We're going to be discussing all of that. Plus, obviously, looking at Israel as well and the whole issue with the Eurovision Song Contest last night. All these so-called woke, sensible, loving, liberal lefties, supposedly kind, and yet you look at what happened outside the venue in Sweden and some of the behaviours, and also Gary Lineker comes in on the action, so we'll be talking about that. I've got a great mystery guest for my outside. I'll give you the clues throughout the show. Christine and Danny will be joining me as my brilliant panel as ever on Sunday, and loads more on the show, so stay tuned. It's on the way.
Well, as we all know, Nana, you and Gaz get on really, really well, so I'm sure that'll be a treat. Thank you, Elphicke. Looking forward to it. Now, remember, folks, you can let me know all your thoughts on the stories we've been discussing today by visiting gbnews.com/your say. Join the conversation there, or message me on our socials. We're at GB News. Now, coming up, churches, universities and hospitals can apply for a free-framed official portrait of King Charles to display as the government expands an £8 million scheme to cement public support for the monarchy. But is this nothing but an outdated, expensive practice? All of that and more to come. I'm Darren Grimes and you're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to your GB News weather update by the Met Office. Sunny spells for some, but also some scattered heavy thunderstorms, but it is going to be feeling warm, very warm for some of us. High pressure still in charge, especially across eastern parts. That's gradually clearing its way eastwards. We do have some weather fronts to give a focus of some heavy rain, especially across Northern Ireland, later into Scotland as well. But we do have weather warnings in force for thunderstorms across much of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and into Scotland later. So we are going to see some heavy downpours, torrential with thunder, lightning and hail. Further towards the south and east though, plenty of sunshine on offer, feeling warm with highs of up to 27, possibly 28 degrees. So heavy showers continuing tonight with the risk of thunder and lightning. They're going to be pulling their way northwards, affecting much of northern England and into Scotland later with heavy rain here as well. Elsewhere, turning drier into the night, some low cloud across western parts, but otherwise temperatures are still holding up at around 11 or 12 degrees. So a mild start as we go through Monday, but a bit of an east and west split. Many places across eastern parts are seeing a dry day once again, but further towards the west, we've got low pressure in charge, bringing outbreaks of heavy and persistent rain, especially across southwest England, Wales and Northern Ireland, feeling cooler for all as well, and with a bit of a breeze across eastern coasts.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
A very warm welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, an official scheme to deliver portraits of His Majesty the King has been extended. It now includes hospitals, Coast Guard centres, job centres, universities, Church of England churches and other public institutions. GB News' political correspondent Olivia Utley sat down with the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden to find out more.
Can you explain to GB News viewers what the scheme is and why you're expanding it?
Yes, well, following the coronation last year, we thought it would be appropriate to make sure that public institutions up and down the country could have a portrait of His Majesty the King. He is, after all, the ultimate public servant, and just as portraits of his late mother hung in buildings up and down the country, so too already are these portraits hanging in many thousands of buildings. And so today I'm announcing a further extension so new institutions can have a portrait of the King, whether that's hospitals, whether it's the Church of England churches, Coast Guards and others. More public institutions will be able to hang a portrait of the King.
Will you be expanding the scheme to include other places of worship, like synagogues?
Not at this stage. We've taken the decision that because the King is the supreme governor of the Church of England, he leads that institution in the way that he does many other public institutions, so it's appropriate to have a portrait of him being provided by the government. Of course, we would very much welcome other institutions having a portrait of the King, and indeed, when I attend synagogues, one of the things we do at the end of almost every service is to sing the national anthem, so I know how committed the Jewish community is to the King.
Why did it take a Labour MP's intervention for you to take this step in expanding the scheme?
Well, actually, I initiated this scheme many months ago and agreed funding with the Treasury. Many thousands of institutions have taken it up. But because we've managed to run this contract so efficiently and get the cost of individual portraits down, it means there's essentially headroom in the contract to be able to open this up to further institutions. It had always been my hope that we could extend it further, but we just had to see what the take-up was in the initial phase.
What do you make of Channel 4 refusing to hang a portrait of the King in their studios?
Well, I find it a little disappointing and somewhat, I'm afraid to say, unsurprising. The King is a unifying figure for the entire nation. I hope they reconsider that.
Well, that's the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden there, tucked away in the corner. Let's see what my panel think of this. Charlie, I'll start with you. Would you feel comfortable hanging a portrait of His Majesty the King in your workplace? Do you think it's good for social cohesion, for building support in the monarchy?
Yes, I do. Of course I'd be happy with it. He's the monarch. He is someone who we all want to support. We all back the royal family, or most of us do. You know, they are integral to our way of life. They are integral to our history. And they are the very focus that binds this country together, whatever the occasion, whatever the weather, whatever disasters and depressions that are going on across the country. The royal family are there. They're above politics. They are the constant in our society. And I think that is something that we, as a unique, and it is a unique thing that we have in this country through the monarchy, and that is why the late Queen Elizabeth II was so celebrated and heralded, which is why I think anything that can be done to continue that, and to continue that sort of constant, that's something that binds all of us as communities together through the monarch, should be celebrated and supported.
Mark's written in, and Mark says all public institutions up and down the country should have a portrait of His Majesty the King. And why not? And this should not be optional and voluntary and opt-in. It should be mandatory. So Mark would actually force Channel 4, those Reds under the bed, to accept His Majesty the King.
Sounds a bit like an old-fashioned dictatorship to me. I mean, there you had Oliver Dowden in his tiny chair in the corner telling us that the monarchy is a unifying force. Of course, it's not a unifying force. If you look at the poll that the Mail on Sunday put out last Sunday, which it focused on rather than the extraordinary defeat, unsurprising, but nonetheless astonishing level of defeat that the Tories experienced, that claimed that more than half of us think that the King is doing a good job. I mean, that's not a ringing endorsement. 60%, yes, think the monarchy should continue. Again, is that a ringing endorsement? Do I sing the national anthem with great pride at England football, rugby and cricket matches? Absolutely, I do. And I think, broadly speaking, the monarchy is a good thing. But is it a unifying thing? I'm not so sure.
I'd include making sure that actually you can have our national flag, the Union Jack, the Union flag, on public buildings as well. I'd want to see more of that.
I think all public buildings should fly the Union flag.
There is nothing more that I prefer and love to see when you go to the United States, for example, America, and you see flags throughout the nation, because it's a proud, patriotic symbol.
That's quite an attractive flag, though, isn't it? Or, you know,
our flag is very attractive.
I'm not.
Well, they're the same colours.
They've got stars and the stripes as well as. I'm a very proud Brit. I just actually don't particularly warm to our flag, and that's not just because of the history of it. I just don't think it's a particularly attractive flag. By the way, when you were introducing Nana, she mentioned Gary Lineker, and that slightly triggered me. Can I just quickly make a point on this? I mean, Gary Lineker, if his politics are as we assume they are, I would say I'm sort of broadly aligned with his politics. But the idea that the horrors, and they are horrors, of what we're witnessing in Gaza, the worst thing that he's seen in his lifetime, when he's lived through Cambodia, he's lived through Rwanda, he's lived through South Sudan, he's lived through the horrors of what happened in Aleppo, just to name 4 or 5 appalling episodes in world history. The idea that Gaza is somehow even worse than any of those, to me, is just baffling.
Well, he's just a social media idiot that's been swept up in what he's seen on his Twitter feed, I'm afraid. So, yes.
He would obviously argue differently, of course.
Yes, of course he would. Yes, very well said.
But it just annoyed me.
Yes, I mean, Charlie Rowley, you're a big fan of the Lineker anyway, aren't you? We'll move swiftly on.
Well, I will have a packet of Walker's Crisps in these pubs that we're keeping open.
That was saving, absolutely. Right, folks, other crisps are available other than Walker's, mind.
Yes, quite.
Other football pundits are available other than Lineker.
Well, we wish they were. We wish they were, yes.
Right, you're with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. Lots more coming up on this show. British adults are more addicted to using their phones than those in France, Germany and America. Charlie Rowley's glued to his. All of that and more to come. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nigel Farage, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
The International Monetary Fund has estimated that Russia will outgrow all advanced economies in 2024. This is in spite of all the sanctions the West has imposed on Russia, in spite of its removal of the SWIFT banking system, in spite of the fact that Germany has almost entirely weaned itself off Russian gas, and in spite of the 50,000 soldiers who have died and the endless resources it has poured into the Ukraine war. So, what are we missing here? Why is Russia going to grow more than the rest of us? Well, it's simple. Russia is willing to make use of its own energy resources to provide abundant supply to its citizens. Increased supply means lower prices, and cheap energy is inextricably linked to economic growth. But since 2008, the United States has grown at twice the rate of the United Kingdom. The big difference is that America has much lower energy prices, while the UK insists on masochistic green policies. But it's no surprise that the Green fanatics in the Scottish government, where they know how to be fanatics, have had to backtrack on their flagship greenhouse gas reduction target. The SNP has committed to reducing Scotland's CO2 emissions by 75% by 2030. Now, the Climate Change Committee has reviewed its policy and advised that the absurd reduction target is out of reach.
Can we accept the CCC's recent re-articulation that this Parliament's interim 2030 target is out of reach? We must now act to chart a course to 2045.
It is time to recognise the truth that net zero by 2050 is unrealistic and unaffordable. It's time we rid ourselves of this foolish and costly idea that will simply make people cold and poor. We need to prioritise cheap energy for Britain's consumers and for companies, for industry, enabling economic growth that will benefit us all.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Sunday with me, Darren Grimes, on your TV, online and on digital radio. Now, lots of you have been sending in your thoughts. Paul says we may as well forget all the music in the Eurovision Song Contest and just call it the European Thong Contest. He says it's very sexualised. On pubs, Archie says, I go to my local pub that doesn't do food because it's just a pub. It has bands on every now and then. Truth be told, I could also do without that. I go for the chatty bar staff and the jibber-jabber with similar-minded blokes until the women start to arrive, and then it's time to leave. Don't join the Garrett Club, Archie. And Sil says, the government should not be helping any business. It's taxpayer money. If pubs cannot run a profit, you do not have a product people want. So you actually agree with Matthew Stadlin, Sil. I doubt you expected that. British adults, folks, I want to talk about them because they're addicted to using their phones, more than those in France, Germany and America. A representative poll of 8,000 people suggests that 44% of adults in the UK look at their phone every hour, compared to 29% in France, 25% in Germany and 41% in America. Let's see what my panel make of this. I certainly look at my phone more than once an hour. I'm sorry.
I mean, I don't know. Does this prove that they're addictive? I feel slightly addicted to my phone, but
yes.
They're quite useful things.
Yes.
I mean, it means in a break, when you've said something like diversity, equity, inclusion is racism, I can then look it up and say to you, actually, it's not just about trying to make sure that we represent the society in which we live and to help previously discriminated against groups. So these are quite useful things.
And then I can use mine to play some soothing music so I can fall asleep to that. Yeah. Now, I mean, you are addicted to your phone, Charlie. You're always buzzing.
Yes. Yeah, the same's my phone. But I think it's... I do think it's actually quite serious, because the addiction comes in when you're attached to something, whether it's social media, for example, and you're constantly looking for either likes or followers, or you
want the dopamine.
You want the exactly, and you then become dependent on the device, and you start to wait for whether it's an email to come through, or you're emailing all the time late at night, or whether you're sort of WhatsApping. WhatsApping seems to be the way of conversation. Texting now again, Snapchat, Instagram, X, Twitter, all of these things that are accessible now to young people. But it's well, this is talking about adults, but it is a worrying time, I think, if you are too dependent on your phone, when you start to then lose the ability to interact on a social, human level.
By the way, there's the phone, which has obviously quite important functions, and the social media. One of the fascinating things that I saw that had come out of this research is that I think only something like 50% of Germans are regularly using social media. In this country, we seem to use it perhaps a lot more than that. And I think it is quite damaging. I mean, why do we need followers? Jesus Christ had followers. Do we need to have followers?
Do you think it's more damaging for adults who are really addicted to these than children who have always had them in their lives and aren't as addicted as we are?
I think it probably strips childhood of so much of the imagination and the creativity with which I was certainly brought up. Running around outside, playing games inside. If I can do one thing as a father, it will be to try to make sure that my son doesn't use it very much. By the way, one other reason, we're having a heat wave at the moment, one other reason I suspect behind the fact that we use them so much is that we have pretty rubbish weather in this country for the most part. I mean, living in London right now, it's like we've been released from some sort of 6-month weather coma. Everyone's having fun. You don't need to be on your phone when you're outside enjoying the sunshine.
True, that's very true. Although Germany has its fair share of...
Probably better weather than
that. I mean, do you think that's got something to do with it? That the British, just get a bit more bored a bit more often?
I don't know about getting bored more often, but I just think we've just depended on this sort of instant sort of, 24-hour news cycles. We need to be instant messaging. We need to be replying. We need to see the latest reels.
Yeah.
Everything is around.
It plays to the ego. It plays to the narcissist, doesn't it?
All right. Well, folks, we'll see what the viewers at home think. Thank you very much to my panel here. You've been with me, Darren Grimes, on GB News Sunday. That was my good friend Charlie Rowley and Matthew Stadlin.
Oh, right, my good friend Charlie Rowley.
Not so good friend. And Matthew Stadlin, thank you very much. But don't go anywhere, though, because there's plenty more coming up on GB News today. In just a moment, it's Fiery Debate with Nana Aquia, and at 6 p.m, it's Neil Oliver with Free Speech Nation at 7 and Mark Dolan at 9. Cheers very much for joining me this afternoon. As I say, Nana up next. See you after the weather with Catherine.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. For the outlook, drier in the east but turning unsettled in the west and also feeling cooler as we go into Monday. So high pressure is going to be moving its way eastwards. We do have some weather fronts that's bringing a focus for some showers or longer spells of rain through the